Hello, I'm Paul Innes, Professor of Shakespeare Studies, and welcome to my channel Shakespeare for All. Today I'm going to be talking about Hamlet. This is one of 3 videos on the play dealing with characterisation, plot and context, and in this episode we'll be talking about the plot. At the end of these videos you'll find some useful study notes together with a list of key words. Now I use the MIT online version of the text together with the Arden 3rd edition. If you're studying for assessments, editions like that with supporting material are really useful. If you want to know more, please remember to subscribe. There are 3 parts to this video. The first part is that we're going to take each act in turn. We're going to look at the length of the individual scenes, how the play moves between them, what happens, how it happens, the momentum. Now this means that we can look at the implications of the underlying structure for the plot development as the play as a whole. Now this isn't just recounting the plot. At various moments I'll be making comments about important elements you may wish to think about a bit more. The second part is some study notes, key ideas that might help you focus your attention on major elements of the plot, and then finally a very short section which is keywords. So on the screen you'll see the shape of the play. I'm not going to read through this, it's pretty straightforward stuff. I've done the arithmetic for you. However, it is worth saying as an overview that in this play there's a certain shape, overall shape. The first 2 acts are reasonably balanced. Act 3 is enormously long. Although it has only 4 scenes, each of those is subdivided into multiple sections. Act 4 is then noticeably shorter and events seem to be faster paced across 7 scenes. Act 5 again is not too long with only 2 scenes, quite complex ones, but in total not a vast amount of wordage, and that's where the play ends. This means you have an overall exposition over 2 acts, followed by an extremely long, intricate hump in the middle of the play, and then swift movement and a move towards the catastrophe at the end. So what we'll do is we'll have a look at Act 1. As I've said, it's a reasonably consistent, smooth exposition. There are 5 scenes. At the beginning, we meet 2 of the castle sentries exchanging places on guard, and on comes Horatio, a high noble, we later find out Prince Hamlet's best friend, arriving with Marcellus, the captain of the guard, to hear a report from the sentries. One of them leaves. There's a lot of interaction as they see the ghost of old King Hamlet. That's basically the beginning of the play. That's what the audience sees to begin with. Hamlet's not on stage yet. We then shift to Act 1, Scene 2, 257 lines in 4 sub-scenes. That's the kind of technique this play uses, slight complications as you move through each scene. Especially in Act 3, it's even more complicated. We've moved to daytime. The whole Danish court's arrived in state. The newly crowned King Claudius is enacting state business. He's very good at it. He sends courtiers as messengers to Fortinbras of Norway. He deals with Laertes and Polonius. Laertes is the brother of Hamlet's fiancée Ophelia, and Polonius is her dad. He's also a major figure in his own right, probably as Chamberlain of the court. He's the highest noble in the land after the royal family, basically. His son Laertes is about to head off to Paris to become a student. Second subsection is interaction between Prince Hamlet, King Claudius and Queen Gertrude. So you can see the movement, action, royal action, things happening. Then we move to the royal family. Hamlet's just come back from his own studies in Germany and found his mother married to his uncle, which is why Claudius is now king according to the laws of succession in Denmark. Hamlet's relative isolation from this new court is marked by his use of the aside when he talks to the audience. Nobody else does that at this point in the play. The court then leaves and Hamlet stays behind and delivers his first soliloquy, intimating to the audience he's already aware something's wrong here. Section 4, Horatio, Marcellus and Bernardo the soldier, the people we saw at the beginning of the play, arrive and say to Hamlet, "You wouldn't guess what we've seen in the battlements." Hamlet questions them in detail and arranges to go on watch with them later. They leave him on his own and he gives a short epilogue to the scene. So there's a lot going on at the very beginning of the play. We then move to Act 1, Scene 3, 136 lines, pretty straightforward stuff. Conversation between Laertes and Ophelia, together with the father Polonius. Now, what matters here is that neither her father nor her brother believes that Prince Hamlet is actually in love with her, is actually in love with Ophelia, and they give her warnings about how to behave. Already in this play, you're seeing people talking about other people. There's then the movement to night, presumably later on the same day. Act 1, Scene 4, 91 lines. Horatio and Marcellus bring Hamlet to the battlements. The ghost enters and gestures towards Hamlet to follow it. Horatio and Marcellus try to stop him. Prince Hamlet defies them and leaves with the ghost, and the other two are following more slowly, and we then move into the next scene. 190 lines. There are 3 sub-scenes. This is Act 1, Scene 5. The ghost reveals everything to Hamlet, urging him to vengeance. When it leaves, Hamlet delivers his second long soliloquy. By this point in the stage, the soliloquy is mostly identified as Hamlet's technique. Claudius uses it later as well, but at the moment, this is Hamlet telling the audience what these things mean for him. Finally, Horatio and Marcellus catch up with Hamlet, and already his language is showing signs of what he calls an antic disposition. He basically says, I have to be politic here. I have to be very, very careful. King Claudius is very powerful. I'm going to put on the appearance of madness. He makes the other two swear never to tell anyone else about what they've seen, aided by exhortations from the ghost off stage, although it's not clear if they hear it as well. That's the first act. It's reasonably straightforward stuff. Then move on to Act 2, which has a short-ish scene followed by an extremely long one. What you'll notice is as we begin to move towards the middle of this play, it gets longer and longer and longer, and the scenes become more complex with more subdivisions. Act 2, Scene 1, standard length, 117 lines long. Polonius is giving orders to his servant Ronaldo. His daughter Ophelia comes in and relates a strange encounter she's just had with Prince Hamlet to her father. Polonius decides to tell Claudius and leaves with his daughter. Polonius thinks that Hamlet's madness has been caused by love. Okay. We then have a very complex scene, and much of the middle of the play is like this. This is Act 2, Scene 2, 605 lines, okay, in 9 subsections. First of all, Claudius enters with Gertrude, along with 2 of Hamlet's student friends, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. They're a bit of a double act. There's probably an in-joke about double acts going on here, because this isn't the only play a pairing like this appears in. Anyway, Claudius tells them that Hamlet's behaviour is worrying them and sets them to watch over him. He's manipulating them, getting them to spy on Hamlet for him. Claudius is a shrewd operator, he's not daft. They leave in order to do so. Polonius comes in, this is the second section, announcing return of the ambassadors to Norway. He also tells the king and queen he thinks he's found a reason for Hamlet's behaviour. Like I said a few minutes ago, he thinks it's love madness. State business dealt with, the ambassadors leave. We then move on to the 4th section, where Polonius, Claudius and Gertrude talk about Hamlet. They see him in the distance and decide that Gertrude and Claudius should hide to see how he interacts with Polonius. Hamlet comes on, fools around with Polonius, actually really having a go at him. I was going to say he was making fun of him, but it's more serious than that. And Polonius leaves just as Rosencrantz and Guildenstern come on. You have a shift to prose, as is a conversation between Hamlet and the 2 students. Prose is not poetry. Prose signifies private discourse, especially when it's used by aristocrats. And there are various asides as the 2 students watch Hamlet and Hamlet watches them. So again, people watching people watching people. Subsection 7, Polonius comes back on and announces the arrivals of an acting troupe. Hamlet makes more fun of him. Subsection 8, some of the actors arrive and there's a very complex interaction. Basically, the players agree to put on a play at court with material that Hamlet's going to write for them, inserted. We then finish the scene, very long scene, with Hamlet's 3rd soliloquy. He's explaining to the audience he intends to use the play to watch Claudius's reaction, to find out if the ghost has been telling him the truth. We now move on to Act 3. Now, as I've said before, it's an extremely long act. There are 4 complex scenes, each subdivided into numerous sections. The midpoint of the play is huge. Act 3, Scene 1, it's only 188 lines. It has 8 sub-scenes. 1. Claudius, Gertrude and Ophelia and her father Polonius all come in with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Claudius and Gertrude question the students, and then Claudius sends them off to continue spying in Hamlet. So you've got a closed circle running the state, spying on the heir to the throne, basically. That's what you see at the beginning. Second section, Claudius asks Gertrude to leave while he and Polonius hide. The plan is to see what happens when Hamlet meets Ophelia. So Gertrude leaves. Third section, Claudius and Polonius set things up. Now notice at this point that Claudius makes an aside to the audience on the fact that his conscience is troubling him. This is the first time that we actually see that Claudius may indeed be responsible for the death of his brother. That's the first objective or correlated element that might actually suggest that what Prince Hamlet has been told is correct. The two of them then leave Ophelia alone, and the convention is that the two men will see what's happening from off stage. Fourth subsection, Hamlet enters with the famous to be or not to be soliloquy, and I suppose technically it's not a soliloquy since Ophelia is still on the stage, but it's treated as one. Number 5, switch to prose again as Hamlet encounters Ophelia. He exhibits more weird behaviour and then wanders off. Ophelia comments on Hamlet's behaviour. She gets a tiny little soliloquy. She then withdraws to a different part of the stage as Claudius and Polonius come back on. We're now at the 7th subsection of this scene, okay? There's a conversation, politic conversation between Claudius and Polonius. Claudius is certain that there's more going on with Hamlet than just love madness. Claudius is shrewd. Claudius is smart. Claudius is astute. He's beginning to work out ways to ensure that his hold on the throne, which he mentions, he calls the state, isn't being threatened by this lunatic prince, if he's really a lunatic. Ophelia then joins the two men and they all leave. That's just the first scene. Act 3, Scene 2, 399 lines, 11 subsections, including the famous mousetrap. The middle of this play is massively complicated. So, to start with, Hamlet enters with 3 of the players and they have a conversation in prose about what's going to happen. The actors leave. Polonius then enters, this is part 2, with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and Hamlet makes sure that Claudius is going to be present at the performance. The 3 others leave him alone on stage. Section 3, Hamlet shouts for Horatio, who comes in, asks him to keep an eye on Claudius during the play. Hamlet wants another pair of eyes watching the king so that it corroborates what he sees. So again, people are watching other people. Section 4, the court enters and settles for the play. The plot is foretold by means of a dumb show, a mime. 5, the prologue enters and speaks, with Hamlet making some quite nasty comments to Ophelia. 6 is the mousetrap. Notice the running commentary by Hamlet all the way through. Claudius jumps up, he starts up when he sees the play's action, and the whole court leaves in confusion, with Hamlet and Horatio staying behind. This is pretty much the midpoint of Hamlet. As far as he's concerned, the midpoint of Hamlet's character and the play, as far as he's concerned, this proves the king's guilt. He discusses what's happened with Horatio. Section 8, switch to prose as Rosencrantz and Guildenstern come in and tell Hamlet his mum wants to talk to him in private. Hamlet makes fun of them. Section 9, the players turn up and play music. Hamlet uses this to comment on the efforts of Rose and Guildenstern to play him as if he's an instrument. Section 10, right, we haven't even finished this scene yet. Polonius enters to repeat the message that Gertrude wants to speak with Hamlet and gets very short shrift from the prince. Hamlet tells everyone to leave him alone, and then to finish off this extremely long scene, we have a revenge soliloquy by Hamlet. Continuing Act 3 is Act 3, Scene 3, 98 lines, 5 sub-scenes, including the famous chapel scene. First of all, Claudius enters in discussion with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. They leave him as Polonius enters. Then Polonius says to Claudius, Hamlet's going to see the Queen. I'm going to conceal myself to find out what's going on, and he leaves to do so. Claudius then speaks a soliloquy. Okay, this is the first time that Claudius actually is on the stage on his own, and he kneels to pray, and he admits his guilt in his prayers. Hamlet turns up behind him, split staging. He sees the king alone at prayer, draws his sword, because it's an opportunity to kill the guy, but he decides not to because he wants complete revenge on Claudius. This isn't just about killing the guy. He wants him damned forever. If I kill him right now, he might go to heaven. That's not good enough, not given what he did to my dad. And Hamlet then leaves to go to his mother's apartments. And then there's a short concluding couplet by Claudius, who then exits. Act 3 continues. Okay, this is Act 3, Scene 4, which is the closet scene. 217 lines and 4 sub-scenes. Starts with Gertrude and Polonius. He's going to hide to see what happens. Part 2, Hamlet turns up and forces Gertrude to sit beside him. The use of force frightens her, and she cries out for help. Remember, she thinks her son's a bit mad. She uses terms like distracted, but what she's worried about is he's gone mad. Polonius starts at the noise. Hamlet notices this and thrusts his weapon through the arras, the tapestry, killing Polonius, in the hope that it's actually Claudius. He draws the arras and he finds the body of the man who was supposed to be going to become his father-in-law. And Hamlet then speaks words to his mother. There's a really strange moment at this point when the ghost enters to remind Hamlet of his purpose, but don't take it out on the queen. She doesn't see the apparition, but she does see her son talking to thin air and thinks he's mad. The ghost exits. There's then a long conversation between Hamlet and Gertrude, mostly by the son attacking his mother for her hasty marriage to this guy Claudius. And they leave separately, Hamlet dragging off Polonius's body. I'm not joking when I say just how complex and long the centre of this play is, okay? So now we move on to Act 4. Suddenly it picks up again. Very short in comparison with what's just gone before. There are 7 scenes and they're almost all reasonably manageable. The pace is picking up. So remember what I said earlier, you have the first 2 acts, then you have a big hump in the middle, and then it speeds up. We're now beginning to speed up as we move through Act 4. 45 lines, this is the first scene. Gertrude and Claudius are with the 2 spies, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and they leave as Gertrude discusses the murder of Polonius with Claudius. He then shouts them to come back on, go and get Hamlet. Next scene, 28 lines. They try to find out, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern try to find out where Hamlet's hidden the body. He makes very sarcastic fun of their attempts to sound him out. We then move on to Act 4, Scene 3, 66 lines, 5 short sub-scenes. Now, things are starting to move quickly here. It starts with Claudius talking to some servants, and he's commenting on the effects of Hamlet's condition. He's worried about it. He knows there's something up. Rosencrantz comes in, this is part 2, tells Claudius Hamlet's under guard, although he's not telling anybody where he's hidden the body. Part 3, through his madness, Hamlet finally tells where it is, and the attendants leave to get it. Part 4, Claudius says to Hamlet, you're going to England, I've got state business, I want to employ you on that. Hamlet exits, quickly followed by the 2 spies. Part 5, Claudius finishes the scene with another soliloquy. He tells the audience that his plan is to have Hamlet executed when he lands in England. This guy's good, he's a very good operator. Act 4 continues. We're now on Act 4, Scene 4. It's only 65 lines, 3 sort of sections. First of all, emblematic procession as the Norwegian army passes over the stage with a captain that stays behind. Hamlet, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern turn up and talk with the captain, who leaves. Hamlet sends the others ahead. Guess what? Hamlet's on his own on the stage. Here we have another soliloquy. He tells the audience what he's going to do to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Claudius is a shrewd political operator, so's Hamlet. Act 4 continues. 4-5 is 211 lines, 7 sub-scenes, including Ophelia's insanity. So you're moving between different locations now. Starts with Gertrude, Horatio and one of the courtiers discussing the condition of Ophelia. Section 2, in she comes. This is her first mad scene. Now, Ophelia has gone insane because of the stress of being ordered by her father to spy on her fiancé, who is also the heir to the throne. And her future husband has just killed her father in what looks like a fit of madness. Everybody tries to humour her, calm her down, keep her nice and under control, and eventually she leaves, and Claudius orders Horatio to leave and keep an eye on her, and then bemoans what's happened to her. Fourth subsection, confusion, as there's an interrupt. Ophelia's brother Laertes bursts in, supported by a revolutionary crowd of commoners, right? And he persuades him to stay outside while he talks with the king. He's basically shouting and screaming, what happened to my father? What are you going to do about it? This guy Hamlet's killed my dad. He's meant to be marrying my sister. What are you going to do, king? And there's a three-way discussion between Laertes, Claudius and Gertrude. Ophelia then comes in with another interrupt, and it's the second part of her performance of madness, and she leaves. And at that point, the scene finishes with Laertes agreeing to have a private audience with Claudius. Both Claudius and Laertes are men of action. This can only mean something bad for old Hamlet, for young Hamlet, if you know what I mean. Act 4 continues. Short scene, Act 4, Scene 6, 31 lines. As Horatio reads a letter from Hamlet to the audience, and then we move back to the negotiations between Claudius and Laertes. This is business. I would play this like something out of The Godfather. They're interrupted by the arrival of a letter from Hamlet for Claudius, and they conspire together against Hamlet. And there's another interrupt by noise of people off stage. Gertrude turns up to tell them that Ophelia's dead. We now move on to Act 5. You can see things speeding up. First scene, 288 lines, 4 subsections. That's reasonably standard. You have the famous gravedigger scene. You then have Ophelia's funeral with Hamlet and Laertes in her grave fighting. Right, that's pretty unpleasant stuff. Everybody tries to calm them down. Hamlet leaves, followed by Horatio at the king's command, and the scene ends with Claudius and Laertes sealing their deal to do Hamlet. Right, Laertes is a revenge figure now. He wants to kill Hamlet because he's killed his father, and Claudius wants to help him for obvious reasons. We're now at the end of the play. Act 5, Scene 2, 402 lines, 9 sub-scenes. 1. Hamlet fills Horatio in on everything that happened to him while he was abroad, including the fact he arranged to have the spies killed. 2. Osric, the courtier, turns up, and Hamlet makes a whole series of vicious comments about him and his behaviour. He's a kind of emblem of Claudius's court. This is the sort of flunky that my uncle has running the country, he says. Osric finally leaves after Hamlet agrees to a mock duel with Laertes. 3. More comments by Hamlet. 4. One of the lords turns up to repeat the invitation and leaves to give Hamlet's agreement to Claudius. Hamlet philosophises on this. 5. The court enters. So now you've got a great big set piece to finish off the play. The audience knows what's coming. It's a revenge tragedy. You're going to have a set piece and bodies everywhere, which is what happens. Hamlet scores the first and second hits in the duel. He's a better fighter than Laertes. Right. Hamlet's good, very good at hitting people. In the meantime, Queen Gertrude drinks from a goblet that Claudius has poisoned as extra insurance in case Laertes doesn't do the job. The duel continues, and Laertes finally scores a hit on Hamlet with a sharpened weapon. The idea was these were meant to be baited. They were meant to have little things on the points to make sure that people don't get hurt by them. What Hamlet doesn't know is not only is Laertes' weapon sharp, it's been poisoned as well. Angered by being struck by a pointed weapon, Hamlet presses Laertes and disarms him. Told you Hamlet was good. Hamlet picks up the rapier that Laertes has dropped and slashes him with it, basically poisoning Laertes with his own poison. There's a lot of confusion because at this point Gertrude dies and Laertes tells Hamlet, "You're dying, mate, because my rapier was poisoned." Hamlet stabs Claudius with it and then starts forcing poison right down his throat. I mean, talk about excessive. And both Claudius and Laertes die as well. So that's 3 bodies on the stage at the moment. Hamlet then dies after asking Horatio to tell all, and in the meantime the Norwegians have arrived, and as a finale with Fortinbras of Norway having turned up on stage. That's the plot of the play in a nutshell. What we need to do now is look at ways that you can use this information for studying. Now, there are 3 main points to consider about the plot of this play. First one, actually the plot line's very simple. There's no double plot, there's no chiasmus, there's none of that. It's pretty much straight plot line. Hamlet has to find out if his suppositions are correct. He finds out that his sense of unease is justified. Claudius did kill his dad, and then he has to go and kill Claudius. Now, the interest, this is a second point that needs to be made, the interest is in the obstacles placed in his way. How is he going to achieve his stated aim? And the third thing to note is that the length of the play, especially the middle, is actually an artificial construct. Now, you have to remember, please remember this, I keep saying this, the main plot line of the play is actually pretty straightforward. It begins with something rotten in the state of Denmark. The audience already knows this before they even meet Hamlet, and they know he's right to be uneasy when he's standing there musing about the speed of his mother's marriage and all the rest of it before he's even met the ghost. Confirmation, full confirmation of Claudius's guilt comes in Act 3 with the mousetrap and the chapel scene where he thinks he's alone and confesses his sins. Now, it's important for Hamlet not to kill him here, regardless of what critics will tell you and what people say about the play. It's not about procrastination, it's about revenge tragedy. Revenge in this period has to be as excessive as possible. The guy's killed my dad, so I've got to do him, but I have to do it in a way that destroys him completely. If I kill him here, he's at prayer, his soul might be saved. That's not enough. I don't just want to kill him, I want to damn him forever. That's basically what he says. There's nothing wrong with that in terms of the genre of revenge tragedy. It's always excessive. It's then just a matter of time before we get to the catastrophe at the end. So of course it's common for revenge plays in the Renaissance to place obstacles in the way of the main character. What's unusual about this one is the amount of time it seems to take him to get confirmation of his target's guilt and then kill him. Now, some of the interest here is in the form of Hamlet's feigned / and or real madness. That again is actually part of the convention. It's not at all unusual in this subgenre of tragedy. The protagonist adopts a posture of madness which seems to shade over into real madness. It's all part of the excess of the form. Now, Claudius himself is a very smooth operator. He arranges for Hamlet to go to England and be murdered there. Hamlet, it turns out, is just as politic. These people are playing off against each other, they're watching each other. He turns the orders against Claudius, resulting in the deaths of the spies, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. But when Hamlet comes back to court, it really is only a matter of time before we reach the catastrophe with the obligatory revenge bloodbath at the end, and the audience knows that. They know what to expect. Now, about the length of the play, there are several things to say here. The first one is, I hope this is comforting to know, but in terms of Renaissance drama, this play on its own stage is unusable, totally unusable. This is because our modern version of Hamlet is based on a conflation of multiple contemporary versions of the text. The play you study is the result of a long process of collation by later literary, not drama people, literary editors. They take what they think are the best bits of all the little Hamlets and stick them together and bolt them onto the first folio, which is held to be the least imperfect of the texts. This means that the play you have in front of you was never actually acted on Shakespeare's stage in that form. It's much longer than any of the individual texts we actually have. In fact, I think it's so long its own audience would have booed it off the stage because it was dull. So you're not alone in thinking that if you have problems watching it or reading it. Second observation, since the version you have in front of you is an idealised, reconstructed modern version, the question is, how did this happen? Now, Shakespeare's plays were reinvented long after he died, after a gap in the 17th century caused by the English Civil Wars and the closing of the theatres. Shakespeare's texts were then reworked, reinvented, reproduced, restaged for an entirely different elite audience. They were also edited and published in new forms for that elite culture. In other words, Shakespeare loses or has his original roots as a popular dramatist removed so that he can become great literature with a capital G and a capital L. So don't worry if the version you have is slightly different from others you see, or if the line numbers don't match up exactly with what I've been doing. The extremely long third act in particular is prone to variation, and of course this is the point where the character of Hamlet seems to spend too much time for his own good worrying about the king's guilt, or not. As a result, Hamlet seems to procrastinate because he thinks too much for his own good. This postpones the resolution. But when you think about it, this is an effect produced by the production, the reconstruction of an excruciatingly long modern text by later editors. It's not something that Shakespeare's own audiences would have seen. They wouldn't have worried about it because he would have achieved his revenge in a much faster and maybe more satisfying manner because the textual versions which were used for those performances were shorter. They didn't have pause buttons to help them with 4.5 hour long performances. So now what we'll do is we'll finish off with some key words, the kind of terminology that we use. If you can get some of these into an assessment, hopefully you score more points because you'll show that you know the conventional terminology of Renaissance drama. First of all, exposition, process which reveals elements of the plot and the way they relate to one another. The aside is a moment where one of the actors steps out of the action and addresses the audience directly. The convention usually is that the other actors don't hear it, don't see it happening. The soliloquy, for which this play is famous, is a speech delivered directly to the audience by an actor standing on their own on the stage, and Hamlet is famous for this. A phrase which I've used, Hamlet uses this himself, is the antedisposition, which is the posture he adopts to cover himself. He's pretending he's mad while he figures out what he's going to do here. I want to gain my vengeance, but I know Claudius is clever. I have to dissemble, I have to deceive. It's also noted that he might actually go mad for a while. Critics often comment on this. I have mentioned something, it's not unique to this play, is a double act. A pairing of characters who are relatively minor, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Now this happens in several Shakespeare plays, and I actually think there's a kind of joke that we are not getting. A shared joke between Shakespeare, his cast and his audience, because it happens in several plays. It's something we've lost. Another thing to look out for is the use of prose, not poetry. In this play, it signifies a moment of privacy between different characters. Another major element is the mousetrap, the play within the play. Very common Renaissance tique of self-referential drama. The mousetrap's probably the most famous one. I've called Hamlet on several occasions a revenger. This is a stock character type common in Renaissance tragedy. The main direction of the impetus to revenge is straightforward, but the exposition is not. That's basically the plot we were talking about earlier. Feigned / tending towards real madness is also very common with revenge figures in this period. It's not unique to Hamlet at all. Another thing that's worth mentioning, I don't do this very often, is the emblematic role. A minor character who functions to represent something wider than their own plot significance. They act as a sort of commentary, or in this case, Hamlet comments on the character to say some nasty things about the way Claudius runs Denmark. The figure I'm thinking of in this respect is the little guy Osric, who turns up at the end of the play to invite Hamlet to the mock duel, which turns out to be anything but mock. Right? Hamlet says some pretty vicious things about poor little Osric. The guy has to stand there and take it because this is the heir to the throne. Nothing he can do about it. So to sum up, what we've done is discuss the plot of the play. We've looked at the implications posed by the extreme length of the modern versions that we tend to use. And good luck with your studies. And if you want to know more, there are videos on characterization and context for Hamlet, so please remember to subscribe.